and parents. They are in our crowd today. These heroes live amongst us every day, humbly. For future generations, we must remember through commemorations and memorials so that we may hear and learn from each other. And so that they too can remember the 21st century began with great struggle between the forces of freedom and the forces of terror. We must ensure to our future generations that America met its duty, and we did not tire, we did not falter, and we did not fail. They will learn that freedom prevailed because the desire for liberty lives in the hearts of every man, woman, and child on the earth. I pray that God can alleviate the anguish of the bereavement and leave only cherished memories of the loved ones and the lost. We stand for freedom, we stand for justice, and for dignity. These are the values that have guided our nation since its founding. Today, I ask that each and every one of you continue to teach everyone within your reach and to always remember. For our first guest speaker is Miss Sarah Atlas. She has a very unique story to tell us. It will inspire you and all of us for the rest of time. I'm proud to introduce Mrs. Sarah Atlas and her companion, Buskar.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor being here with everybody. I am a civilian member of New Jersey Task Force 1, which is an urban search and rescue team under the New Jersey State Police Homeland Security Branch. I'm a civilian volunteer, as I said. We supply our own dogs, our own equipment. We are at Lakehurst Navy Base, and they provide us with a facility to train. We have a 6-acre training field. What's not known to many people is there's no signs that tell you how to become involved with this. I remember as a little child that I was watching the first dogs, before FEMA even had search dogs, work the rubble devastation in Armenia. And I said, I want to do that someday. But as I said, we have recruiters for the Navy, we have recruiters for all the branches of the military, but there's no billboards or anything that tell you how to become involved in this urban search and rescue. As fate would have it, and I believe in divine intervention, I was working as a marketing director for a racetrack, and the people that were on the ambulance as attendants were part of Pennsylvania's FEMA team as dog handlers. My path had been sealed. I had a new puppy, and 2 years later, I was at 9/11. Little did I know what lay before me. I brought a picture of my dog, Anna, who is actually my soulmate. We went through the depths of hell together, and unfortunately she paid the ultimate sacrifice with her life. She became very ill up there. When we arrived at the Jacob Javits Center, we were there at 12 o'clock noon. I was working as a paramedic at a unit when my pager went off, and I got the call to get to Lakehurst. We rushed through red lights, God knows how I didn't get a speeding ticket, and picked up my dog and went to the base. When we arrived, the first thing I noticed were people walking with their cell phones to their ears, covered in ash. And not knowing what to expect, and as you know, you can train as hard as you want for any kind of situation, but nothing prepares you for the real world, and the real life problems. And I said, don't they know what's going on? Why are they talking on their phones? Not knowing that there was no communications. As I said, we just got off a bus. We were dropped off 15 blocks from the Jacob Javits Center and were told to proceed to the pile. As we walked, there were 15 of us with dogs, and it's echoing, the dogs are here, they'll find them. The dogs are here, they'll get them. They'll find our families, they'll find our brothers. It left me with an eerie feeling. In the worst of times, I was able to recognize and see the good of humanity. We had people coming with Dixie cups, ice cream for the dogs. People were donating blankets and anything they could. And as I remember, I had an older gentleman come up to me, and he was carrying a torn and tattered piece of foam rubber with a red ribbon on it. He looked like he could hardly afford to clothe himself. He said, "This is from my dog. It's all I have to give, but I hope it makes your dog more comfortable." The outpouring and love and the expression from just the general public just amazed me, absolutely amazed me. I spent 10 days there, and it changed who I am as it changed us as a country. I took freedom for granted, but I have to tell you, from that day forward, I was proud of my country, and I don't take freedom for granted anymore. This is my current dog, Buska. Unfortunately, the dog that I had up there, Anna, she and I both were very ill when we returned, and she died 10 months later from diseases and illnesses that she contracted at 9/11. I'm still sick, but I will go again if I get the call. At the time, prior to 9/11, Anna and I worked out of a firehouse, and the little kids used to come over to see her, and their parents would say, "Let her smell you in case you get lost." Well, when the devastation happened, the kids became all upset. It made the newspapers that Anna was sick and would no longer work. And the little kids were talking elementary, well, who's going to find us if Anna can't work anymore? It became so hysterical amongst the school children that one of the teachers decided to do something to get the children involved in a positive way. And they held a fundraiser to obtain a new dog for me. And that dog was Tango. In middle of January, we had 70-degree weather, and we had 500 children from different schools walking to raise money. And they purchased a dog for me who I lost about 6 years ago. And he, in turn, served our country. Well, you know the adage of paying it forward. It's then that I decided to start a nonprofit foundation called the Search and Rescue Dog Foundation. Because as many of you don't know, the military gets their dogs provided, the police, the fire departments, but the civilian volunteers, 99% of us, we purchase our own dogs, we pay our own training expenses, we get given uniforms, but everything else is out of pocket. It costs approximately $10,000 to take a dog through certification. There's only 250 dogs certified to the level of training in this entire country. So it was then that I decided to start a nonprofit foundation, and we give grant money to civilian volunteers to continue their work serving their country proudly by giving them money to purchase a replacement dog for any of their canines that are no longer able to work, be it injury, illness, old age, or death. It is a great honor and a privilege for me to be here today in front of you, and Buska and I hope to continue to serve our country, and I thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Mrs. Atlas, for your wonderful story. Anna has our utmost respect, and we are honored to have you serve and for her to have served us. For our next speaker, I'm proud to introduce a Master Instructor of International Association of Firefighters, Battalion Chief John Alston.
Good evening. When I first found out about this event, I was actually very honored. During the response to 9/11 and the days following, and even the months and weeks, there was a woman who had lost her husband. Her name was Lynn McGuinn. And Lynn was so passionate about what could be done for families, firefighters, and survivors that she became involved in a number of groups. I was born and raised in Jersey City, but I live in the city of Plainfield. And Lynn, through her efforts, sponsored a model and a display, and it was an exact replica of the Twin Towers. And it impressed me because I would take my children to the library, and I wanted to know who did this. It was built to scale. The ratio, everything, the plaza, everything. And it stood about 20 feet tall. So from bringing my children there, and they knew that I had responded, I wanted to know who was involved, and Lynn McGuinn was one of those people that was involved. We met, we arranged to have a memorial service, and we stayed in touch, believe it or not, through social media since that time. And I got an email from her about a week and a half ago and said that there's a gentleman from the Navy who's looking for a speaker, and I thought of you. And that just blew me away. And I said, you know, that's always a tough day for me. You know, she says, well, from all of the years, she says, I've been watching, and I think you have something to say. So I'm just going to give you what I have, and just bear with me. I would bring you greetings from the Jersey City Fire Department. Geographically, Jersey City is the other side of the Holland Tunnel. We're right across the street from New York City downtown. We have for years had a mutual aid agreement with New York, the city of New York, because all they have to do is shut down the Holland Tunnel and we can be in downtown New York in 4 minutes. We have a station that's right by the Holland Tunnel. And so during the '93 bombing, we actually sent a contingent over, and we became part of their emergency response plan, even with evacuations, because where are you going to put tens of thousands of people if you dump any of the buildings in downtown? You shut down the Holland Tunnel and you bring them to New Jersey. And that's why, if you remember any of the videos or any of the news coverage, you would see the people that Sarah talked about that were covered in dust and plaster. They literally walked through the Holland Tunnel and shut it down before we could. So on that day, we got to know many of our friends. Now, we trained with the New York City Fire Department. I was part of the rescue company for 10 years. And when we put that back together, we actually ended up going to New York to do a lot of our training because we didn't have the equipment. So we knew the people. We knew the people who had done a lot of the search and rescue prior to an event such as this. So getting back to what I want to talk about, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my experience and mainly to meet you. I got a chance to meet some of you today. And I have my wife and my dad here. My dad's a Korea War vet. He's 85 years old, and my wife Cheryl, who helps put me back together after disasters and responses, is here, and I'm going to look for her signal to cut me off because you ask a firefighter anything, they just won't stop talking. I want to thank you for your invitation. Thank you for your families. I want to thank you for your commitment, your patriotism, your service, your self-sacrifice, that you would volunteer to put yourself in harm's way to protect our way of life and our belief that there is a better way to do things. Democracy is a young thing in this world. We get to practice it, but when you really practice it, you have to practice it in such a way that you will fight and defend our Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. And I salute you more so than you allowing me to speak today. Your commitment and service to our country is unparalleled. This anniversary, as I said, was tough because when you're in public safety, and even when you're in the military, you don't have a choice of where you're going to be deployed. You have to be responsive, you have to be prepared. And no one could prepare us for that day. No one, absolutely no one could. If I had to frame this, I would. My son always teases me because I always like to remember things with letters. 5 R's and 3 C's and 7 C's and the like. And if I had to frame this, I would utilize 5 R's, and they would be reaction, response, resilience, remembrance, and resolve. My reaction initially, I was insulated and I was isolated that day. I had switched my television stations cable boxes off because I was going to switch to satellite TV, and I had turned all the TVs off waiting for the satellite installation. So I had no idea what was going on, none whatsoever. I just knew that I had to get on my roof and look southwest, so obviously I wasn't looking northeast, just to make sure that there was a clearing. And if I had to cut some trees or whatever, I would do that. And I'm sitting on my roof, and my neighbor came out and she just started yelling, John, a plane hit the World Trade Center. And I had to process that because anyone that lives there, I grew up there as a young boy. I watched the towers go up and I watched them come down. Some will remember the heroic landing in the Hudson River, where the pilots in that area are trained because it's so densely populated that if you have an issue, you put the plane in the water. It's your best chance of survival. So my initial instincts were this was no accident. This was no accident. That was my gut reaction. So I had to run across the street and see what was going on. But then I finally turned my scanner on and I'm listening with all the transmissions. There was a deputy chief driving down the FDR who had the wherewithal to say this is not an accident. Hold all members, because this was during the change of shift early morning. No one knew who was working, who had left the firehouses, who was going to respond. And again, it was the most densely populated area for us. So in public safety, when we respond in that way, we now plan. We have to assume the worst. We have to assume that everything may have a secondary or tertiary threat, because it's not the same game as it has been before. So my initial reaction was horror, because I then saw the second plane hit, and to travel from my home, which is about 18 to 20 miles from, people were just pulling on the side of the roads, because you can see the towers from there, and you can see the smokestack, and you're trying to listen to all the communications. I'm listening to the New York band, and I'm also listening to the Jersey band, and trying to get on the cell phone and get information, because we had to go to a task response. We were not to go back to our regular firehouses. We had to meet in other locations to receive gear and receive orders. And I was on the off shift. Initially, we were told we were going to work Jersey City, and the on-duty rescue was going to go into New York. Those plans, as you know, in the military, those plans change moment to moment. But we were there not too long after the second tower came down. The rescue of that effort is mammoth. It's mammoth. I cannot describe it. I actually brought a picture that I'll show to anyone, and I stood that book up. That book was done by the New York Times. It was a listing of all of the victims, the firefighters, civilians, police officers, and EMS workers that perished, that were known to be perished, because there are still remains that have not been identified. And so that book, it was most appropriate that you had an empty seat. And if anyone wants to look, some of my friends. Our military has no parallel. Our military has no parallel. I got to meet some of you today, and I am amazed. That sound does not bother me whatsoever. I know that our safety and our security is tied to those roaring engines. It is tied to the mechanics. It is tied to the engineers, the electricians, and the pilots, and those personnel that are going to be dropped off. I appreciate your efforts on our behalf to protect our way of life. Most of you, believe it or not, I know some of you were trained as firefighters in your basic training. Much of what we got in the fire service, we got from a gentleman called Lloyd Lehman in 1950, who was a naval officer. That one got me. Who was a naval officer who taught us about fog nozzles and indirect attack and how to plan for responses. A lot of our knots, our technical rescue knots, are naval knots. We were talking about it earlier, some of the knots that you learn to tie. So I can appreciate the level of your training, not just the military response, but to know how to protect people in all types of situations. The next R would be resilience. Resilience is defined as the ability or the capacity to return to normal. None of us have returned to normal. There is no such thing. I hear pundits talk about post 9/11. I guarantee you we're still living through it. There's no post. There's only the plan for the future. How we can respond and protect ourselves better. How we can eliminate threats before they reach the level of a World Trade Center or a Shanksville. Shanksville, we had our original heroes who brought the plane down before it got where it could do damage for someone else. The military that responded when the Pentagon was under attack. All of it is a shining moment for us. Let us never, never, never forget that on that day, yes, hatred, Chapel, yes, hatred did rear its head, but the response, the robust response of not just military, not just public safety, the civilian fire safety directors that were inside of the towers that did not leave their post so that they could evacuate people, much to their own demise. Tens of thousands of people went home that day, on a dreadful day for all of us. Now, when I talk about remembrance, people use the term "we will never forget." And sometimes it bothers me, sometimes it's not. As I said, this holiday is a real tough one. And I don't want to get into the eye bag, but there are and have been times where, because of all of the coverage, I didn't want to get out of bed. I just didn't want to get out of bed. There are times when I'm working, if dispatch puts too many calls on the same frequency, I have that memory of riding in and trying to discern who needed help and who didn't. Because even though there were radio communication problems that day, the sheer number of transmissions, that was more of a problem for us with anything else. And to have to relive that, it's an issue. But I have to remember Deputy Chief Oser. William Oser is a deputy chief that retired in Jersey City. He honored the New York City firefighters by taking contingents of firefighters and going and working New York City stations so that they could go look for their friends. And when those numbers dwindled because of so many memorial services, he then started taking Jersey City firefighters to funerals to stand as honor guard over and over again. It got to the point where if you played Amazing Grace, I would literally forget I was a Christian. I'd heard it too many times. It had just played through my very, very soul. And the number of times that we had to respond. So for remembrance for us, you don't have to remind us to remember. But it is good that we remember as a nation, as a country, what can potentially happen and what we are really, really capable of. Captain Mark Lee, I worked with, recently died. Just about everyone that worked the pile that day that has some type of illness, whether it's chronic bronchitis with me 2-3 times a year, or the mental issues, the depression, what could have been done differently. There are physical scars and there are psychological scars, and I can assure you there were spiritual scars as well, Chaplain. Marky Lee, I'll miss him. I got to train his son coming on the job. Wonderful man who would not leave. He just would not leave. Every day heroes that were there searching for remains, weeks and weeks and weeks and months after. Now I hear people getting tired when we do remember. I understand that people are concerned when we have to go through security checkpoints at the airports, and sometimes we have to have security checkpoints at some of the bridges and tunnels, and they grow tired of it. Some have grown complacent. When we understand that this threat is real and that it's not going away, that we have to participate in our own deliverance, we have to look at you, that you're still showing up and joining the military, even with threats like this. I'm still amazed. My own youngest son came on the fire department 2 years ago. I'm amazed after what he saw me go through that he still wants to be a firefighter. And even volunteer firefighters who receive no pay, who work in areas that are still under threat assessment, are still going and showing up. I haven't grown tired of it because I miss my friends. And I believe that when you talk about them, they live again. As I look at each and every one of you chief officers, I got to meet some of you today. I see our hope. I see promise. I see our future. But please don't ever forget your commitment. I spoke to some of you today and asked about why you joined and where you were from and what significant thing kept you here. But it's even more important that you wanted to become an officer. There is a huge difference. Ask anyone over here. There's a difference. And with every rank that you attain, you become a better person and a different person as you acquire a new skill set, as you move within the realms of command and control. Your thought processes have to be have to change. It doesn't mean that you change completely as a person. What it means, though, is that you have to take on a greater responsibility. As a firefighter coming in, I only had to be concerned about myself and getting home to that woman and my 2 sons. But when I became an officer, I became in charge of a crew. I had to be responsible for them and their families and getting them back. And then as a battalion chief, standing out in front of a building, commanding a battalion, I have to not only be concerned about those firefighters and the citizenry, but the long-term effects on every response that we do. So take that and multiply it to what you're going to be involved in as officers. As you seek those higher levels and ranks, you have to be serious about your commitments. First, the commitment to yourself, the commitment to your families, the commitment to the citizenry that you've been sworn to serve, the commitment to each other, the commitment to your superiors, your cohorts, and your subordinates, the commitment to a mission, and a commitment to an ideal. When you are that person, when you move forward, when you start to know where you fit within an organization, it will change you. On September 11th, 13 years ago, I thought I knew what all this was about. Every day I'm amazed. Every day there are changes. So we have a new resolve. We will not cower. We won't complain. We're going to stand firm. We'll stand united. And as a nation and a people, we will stand. Thank you so much for your opportunity. God bless you. God bless the United States.